Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 294, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2 is almost here, and this is such a stacked fight card, even with the short notice replacements. And I'm going to go through the entire pay-per-view main card, briefly discuss each fight, and then at the end of the video, I am going to grade UFC 294 on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst pay-per-view ever, 10 being the greatest UFC pay-per-view of all time, and I'm going to answer the question whether or not you should purchase UFC 294. Now, before I get into it, I'm going to show you the entire UFC 294 main card. Comment down below what grade would you give UFC 294 on a scale from 1 to 10 before you even hear my opinion. Now, before I get into talking about the fights, there are 3 factors that I consider most important when looking at a card. 1, the skill level of the fighters. Are they bottom of the barrel skill level fighters? Are they mid-tier fighters? Are they the elite level fighters? 2, is the fight relevant to the division? Is it a title fight? Is it a #1 contender fight? And lastly, is the matchup on paper a quality matchup? On paper, does it look like, okay, this is going to be a fan-friendly fight? Starting off with the fight that opens up the pay-per-view main card, we have Said Nurmagomedov versus Muin Gafurov. Now, this fight honestly isn't that great. I'm looking forward to this fight. I think it's a good fight, but it's nothing special. I feel like it's a little bit of a mismatch. It's relevant to the division. I think Said Nurmagomedov's a top 15 bantamweight. He's not there quite yet. He lost his last fight against Jonathan Martinez, but that was a razor-close fight that Said Nurmagomedov could have won. And, you know, it kind of makes sense because they're both coming off of losses. But you look at Muin Gafurov, who's a very good fighter, has some good wrestling, which is kind of Nurmagomedov's weakness, which is funny because you hear the last name, you think of grappling immediately. But Gafurov lost his last fight. It was his UFC debut. It was on short notice, but against John Castaneda. And it was like a clear loss. So I just feel like, even though this is a good fight, it's a solid fight. I'm looking forward to this fight. It's not really all that relevant to the division because Said Nurmagomedov beating Muin Gafurov doesn't do much for him. And on top of that, I feel like it's a bit of a mismatch. Said Nurmagomedov, elite level striker, has very good submission skills as well, very good grappling as well. And Muin Gafurov, he's still a bit of an unknown. You look at his most recent win outside the UFC, 15-7 opponent. Before that, a guy who's 15-1, and then he lost to Chad Anheliger on Dana White's Contender Series 2 years ago. So I feel like Said Nurmagomedov, had he had a little bit more of a quality opponent, I think this would have been a better fight. But overall, it's still a decent fight. I think both guys are still pretty skilled. I would just say Gafurov is more towards that mid-tier skill level than anything. Moving up on the card, we have Ikram Aliskerov versus Warlley Alves. I don't even know what to say about this fight because I don't want to just crap on the fight because I'm looking forward to seeing Ikram Aliskerov. I'm glad they kept him on the card, but this is another fight that got ruined by a cancellation. It was originally supposed to be Ikram Aliskerov versus Nasruddin Imavov, which I was hyped for. I've been wanting to see. There's a lot of hype behind Ikram. He's won fight in the UFC. He beat Phil Hawes, brutally KO'd him in his UFC debut, and we've been wanting to see him test it, and UFC decided, you know what? We want to build some contenders in the middleweight division. We're going to throw Ikram to the wolves against Paulo Costa at UFC 291. I knew as soon as they announced that that fight wasn't happening. But then they announced Ikram versus Nasruddin Imavov. Made perfect sense. Nasruddin Imavov has visa issues. He can't fight at UFC 294. So we get Warlley Alves as like a 2 to 3 week late notice replacement. Warlley Alves has lost 3 out of his last 4. You know, he lost his last fight against Nicholas Dalby. Now we're supposed to expect Warlley Alves to come in and beat Ikram Aliskerov. So in my opinion, this fight really isn't, it's nothing. I mean, I think Ikram's a highly skilled fighter, but it's still a bit of an unknown. He hasn't fought the elite of the elite. He hasn't been tested. He's not getting really tested in this matchup because Warlley Alves, I think, is kind of on his way out. It's not really super relevant to the division because neither guy is going to be ranked after this fight. I mean, it would be shocking to see Ikram get a ranking after beating Warlley Alves. Now, overall, I do think Ikram is a very highly skilled fighter. I think Warlley Alves, I don't think he's like bottom of the barrel, but he's very, very close. He's just off of the bottom. And overall, I do think it'll be an exciting fight because I think most likely we'll probably see a fast finish win for Ikram Aliskerov. And who knows, maybe Warlley Alves gets a shocking KO upset. But overall, kind of disappointed in this fight. I don't know if I'm just super disappointed because the original matchup was so much better or what. But honestly, in terms of a second UFC fight, it isn't horrible matchmaking by the UFC, to be quite honest, and it's better than the fight completely falling off the card. Moving up on the card, we have the featured fight on the main card, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker. This is a great light heavyweight fight. In a different universe, Ankalaev is the light heavyweight champion right now. He fought Jan Blachowicz to a draw in his last fight for the vacant light heavyweight title. And unfortunately for Magomed Ankalaev, he didn't win on the scorecards. Most people thought he won, but I have no problem with the draw. It is what it is. But either way, two high-level light heavyweights. I know the light heavyweight division isn't the greatest. Both guys ranked in the top 10. Magomed Ankalaev, it's been a while since he's lost. Johnny Walker's had a career resurgence. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. He's coming off that win over Anthony Smith. And this is a banger for the light heavyweight division. Magomed Ankalaev is very, very good. He's elite, and he's just super well-rounded. He's kind of, conservative on the feet and really defensively responsible. Meanwhile, Johnny Walker, he goes out there and just looks for the KO, fights super recklessly. So I think no matter what, this fight should be pretty good. But overall, it's very meaningful for the division. I know the division is kind of up in the air right now with you have a vacant title. Well, technically it's not vacated yet because Jamal Hill still has it. But Jamal Hill's injured. You're going to have Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira for the vacant title at UFC 295. Then most likely Jamal Hill's next in line, depending on when he returns from his injury. But the winner of this fight, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker, is right behind them. It would not be shocking to see either one of these guys fight for the UFC light heavyweight title next year. So this is super meaningful for the division. It's two high-level fighters, and it should be a fun fight on paper. I absolutely love this fight, and I cannot wait for Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker's always must-watch. He's either going to get brutally KO'd or he's going to find a brutal KO like what he did to Paul Craig 2 fights ago. It was absolutely insane. He couldn't finish Anthony Smith, which is kind of a downer a little bit, but either way, Johnny Walker goes out there super explosive, looking for a finish, and Magomed Ankalaev, very hard to finish. So it should be an interesting fight. Moving up on the card to the co-main event, we have Kamaru Usman versus Khamzat Chimaev, a fight that I truly thought we would never get. This is a fight that a lot of hardcore fans have been anticipating basically since 2020 when Khamzat Chimaev burst onto the scene and the UFC was matching up Chimaev with Leon Edwards. The plan by the UFC was if Khamzat can beat Leon Edwards, unranked Khamzat Chimaev versus top 5 Leon Edwards, the plan was to book Khamzat Chimaev against Kamaru Usman. That was the plan. They booked the Leon Edwards fight 3 times and ended up falling out 3 times, and then the whole timeline fell apart. But then we thought we might finally get it. They booked Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns, and then they had Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards. And Kamaru Usman, if he were to beat Leon Edwards in the rematch, which was UFC 278, people forget that was a trilogy. If he were to beat him, he was going to fight Khamzat Chimaev next. Khamzat Chimaev was going to fight Nate Diaz just to keep busy. It was basically a guaranteed win, and the UFC was being vindictive towards Nate Diaz. Unfortunately, Kamaru Usman gets brutally head kick KO'd in the 5th round. Then Khamzat Chimaev misses weight against Nate Diaz, and everything completely falls apart. It looks like this fight's never going to happen. Kamaru Usman fights the trilogy, loses a decision. Now he's on a 2-fight losing streak. Khamzat Chimaev, in the meantime, only fights Kevin Holland, then sits out for a whole year, and then all of a sudden, he's moving up to middleweight, and he's finally moving up to middleweight. He's going to fight Paulo Costa. And Paulo Costa pulls out of the fight. Kamaru Usman raises his hand and said, you know what, I'll step in. And this is one of those matchups that, I hate that it's on short notice, but it's a banger fight. I mean, no matter what, Kamaru Usman, even on short notice, is a very tough matchup for anyone. And this is a fight that I feel like most fans have literally been dreaming of for the last 2 to 3 years. And at 185, the fact that it's just total chaos considering it's on short notice, and the fact that Dana White says this is a #1 contender fight. Now, I know everything Dana White says isn't true. He sells a lot of wolf tickets and makes a lot of false statements. But I truly believe the winner of this fight, if they do it impressively at least, or it's a really good fight and they squeak out a win, but it's a close fight, competitive fight, I think they're getting a title shot, 100%. I think Khamzat Chimaev easily getting a title shot if he beats Kamaru Usman. And I think Kamaru Usman, if he beats Khamzat Chimaev, Dana White will give Kamaru Usman a title shot because Dana White likes Kamaru Usman because Kamaru Usman always been active, kind of a company man, stepping in on short notice here. And then Khamzat Chimaev, he already sees the potential of a future superstar in the UFC. So, I mean, this fight, outside of just the short notice aspect of it, you have 2 elite of the elite. Both of them are ranked in the top 5 at welterweight. I know this is at middleweight. You have 2 guys who, stylistically, it's a fun matchup because Kamaru Usman, heavy wrestler with ever-evolving striking that's not great but has really good knockout power. And then you have Khamzat Chimaev, unbelievable grappling, unbelievable BJJ and submission skills. and comes out to fight each and every time. And then the fact that, it's for a #1 contender fight. I mean, this fight has everything. The only thing I dislike about this fight is the fact that it's on short notice, and the fact that also you have Kamaru Usman on a 2-fight losing streak, up a weight class. So it's almost like there's always going to be that asterisk next to it because of all those factors. But overall, love this co-main event. It's the best the UFC could do once Paulo Costa pulled it out of the fight. Moving on to the main event, we have Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2. I love it, but I hate it. I absolutely love it, but I absolutely hate it. I mean, 2 of the elite, 2 of the pound-for-pound best. I mean, I don't know if you can make another matchup that has as much skill as these 2 guys fighting each other. Back at UFC 284, everyone thought Islam's going to go out there and dominate Volkanovski. I didn't have those expectations. I thought Volkanovski would be very tough. I thought he'd be very competitive, and sure enough, he was. Now, Volkanovski, I mean, he's been dominant for so long in the featherweight division, and he moved up. He fought Islam and he lost, but it was almost like a win. People acted like he won, acted like it was a robbery. But nonetheless, just having a competitive fight with Islam Makhachev was a win for Volkanovski because he was moving up in weight anyway. So just having that close fight was a win for him. And now you're having the rematch. I mean, it doesn't get much higher stakes for this. Alexander Volkanovski is looking to become the 2-weight champion. He wants to hold the featherweight belt and the lightweight belt simultaneously. And then you have Islam Makhachev, who's looking to create a path and create a resume that considers him the GOAT of the lightweight division. And I know it'll be a little bit weird if he beats Volkanovski on short notice, and people will kind of discredit that win a bit, and I understand why. But a win over Alexander Volkanovski, I think, does a lot for Islam's resume. I mean, 2 wins over Alexander Volkanovski, a win over Charles Oliveira, maybe another win over Charles Oliveira, a win over Justin Gaethje. A win here cements his path, or really cements his status already as one of the greatest lightweights of all time, in my opinion. One more fight after this, I think he's guaranteed lightweight GOAT status, to be quite honest, because there's not been a lightweight champion that's been able to hold onto the belt for a significant period of time. And honestly, outside of it being short notice, and I hate to keep mentioning that, I love this fight. I mean, this is the best fight, I feel like. Like, thinking of all the different possible matchups right now in the UFC, this is hands down one of the best title fights that you can make. On paper, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2 is a better main event than the original main event, which was Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira 2. But I do hate that it's on short notice. That is, it just leaves an asterisk next to it. But overall, 2 elite of the elite fighters, 2 of the best fighters arguably in the UFC right now. You could put those guys as anywhere in the 1 through 3 best fighters in the UFC right now. The stakes couldn't be higher, because if Makhachev loses to Volkanovski on short notice, I mean, that's going to be a big hit to him. People are going to, say, oh, well, he was a fraud. And I can already see that happening, even though that's not necessarily true. But this is must win for both guys. Volkanovski may never get another shot to become double champ. He's getting older. He's 35 years old. So it's now or never if he wants to become double champion. And I mean, the stakes could not be higher for this fight. It's a fan-friendly matchup. The first fight at UFC 284, I think, was one of the best fights of the year, period. It was an amazing fight, amazing display of skills. So I absolutely love this main event. And, I know people say, oh, you criticize the UFC too much. You have to give it to the UFC. They had 2 massive fight cancellations for UFC 294. And somehow, on paper, they built a better card. On paper, they built a better card. I still don't like it just because of the short notice aspect of it. But that's just a minor complaint. I still love this card. I still think it's a great card. And this is just about the main card. I'm not discussing the prelims, but the prelims are amazing as well. I've talked about them in countless other videos. But this main card is a really solid pay-per-view main card. It's taken some hits, especially with the Nasruddin Imavov pullout, and you have Warlley, Alves in there. But overall, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2 is one of the best title fights you can make right now. Now, as far as my scoring, I want so badly to give this card like a 9 or a 10. I feel like it is a 9 or a 10. When I'm looking at this card, I'm thinking, Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski 2, Kamaru Usman versus Khamzat Chimaev. That's a fight I've always wanted. You have a really good light heavyweight featured fight on the card, Magomed Ankalaev, Johnny Walker. But then after that, you get to Ikram versus Warlley, Alves. It's like, not really super competitive. And then I don't love the Saeed Nurmagomedov, Muin, Gafurov fight. And I was really thinking about it, and I was thinking, you know what, maybe this does deserve a 9, but because of the short notice aspect of the main and co-main event, I am going to give UFC 294 an 8.5 out of 10. Honestly, if everyone's on full camps and let's say Imavov is still in this card, I think it's a 9.5 out of 10. I think as it stands right now, I almost gave it a 9, but I said, you know what, I'm going to deduct a half a point because of the short notice aspects. I still love this fight. I still love these fights. I still love the main and co-main event, but I just think you can't ignore the fact that there's always going to be a cloud over the result of the main and co-main event because of the short notice aspect of both Volkanovski and Usman stepping in. But ultimately, it's still a better fight card on paper. I mean, if you're talking full camp to full camp, the original fight card is probably an 8.5. And then this fight card, if they have full camps, I would probably say is a 9.5 or a 9 at the bare minimum. So this is one of the best fight cards of the year, regardless of the injuries and the pullouts. I still think UFC 294 on paper, obviously we have to see how it plays out. I think it's the best UFC pay-per-view of 2023 so far on paper. We'll see how it actually plays out. I'm really looking forward to it. I've done a bunch of UFC 294 content already. I'll link the entire playlist down in the description, including my full card predictions. So go check out those videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of my grade. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.